welcome to the Popcorn Counter here at the Two Real Cinema Club. I'm James Rosica.
And I'm Andres Lorente.
Wait a second. What's that behind you there?
Behind me. Oh,
yeah.
That's a mic.
No. What's this guy behind you here?
Oh, that's a mic. Too. Also. Oh. I'm sorry. I understand your confusion. That's my lifelong friend, Michael E. or Michael Edward or just Michael Primmer, depending where you are in his extensive IMDb listings. He's a professional sound man and a guest today here. Michael Primmer, thank you for joining us on the Two Real Cinema Club.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So how do you guys know each other?
Birth.
That covers a multitude of ills. Tell me more.
We grew up in the very same town here in Maine. I met Michael probably when I was like 8 or 9 years old, playing like youth soccer and youth hockey, and then
I think it was youth hockey that started it all.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's ice hockey.
Ice hockey.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Right. So do you literally remember the moment that you met at the age of 8?
No, the very moment, no. It was probably just in a mess of people who could barely skate, and then me just firing a wicked slap shot, probably in the upper 90 miles per hour, right at Michael. He was a goaltender, and I doubt he saved it, but sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't.
They gave me the affectionate nickname of Civ, and I never quite figured out what that meant, but I adopted it and took it on with pride. I dare say it might have been a few years before the age of 8, even. So it was...
Whoa.
Yeah.
It might have been like 5 or 6 back in the early days of ice hockey. For us, anyway.
Yeah.
What was that show that used to be on TV in the 1970s? What's My Line? Something like that, where people come in and you have to guess what they did for a living.
Yes.
So will you explain what do you do for a living?
I record sound for a living.
So like your official title is sound recordist?
Well, it depends on the circumstance, whether, if I'm filing my taxes or if I'm filling out an application for a job. It depends on the context a little bit. But so I work in a variety of hats. I wear recording sound. So I will work as a location sound mixer. Sometimes I work as sometimes I'll work as a boom operator. Sometimes, and then on a movie or TV show, when you have a larger crew, sometimes I might be the sound utility if I'm not one of the other two positions.
And what's sound utility?
So generally speaking, as a location sound recordist is another term. There's a lot of terms for the same thing, but ultimately, I record sound mostly for film and for video and for digital now.
Awesome.
So it's a combination. I work on movies, I work on TV shows, on documentaries, corporate videos, commercials, occasional home video for a friend, or a video podcast if it were.
Awesome. I'm fascinated to know how do you start in that line? How do you start in sound recording? I mean, do you take a course? Do you get training? Do you, is it that you're kind of, you start on like a really small picture because you're somebody's friend, or how does it work?
Well, there's a variety of entry points. There's no real absolute direct path. In fact, a lot of times talking with colleagues, it's always interesting to hear different people's stories, like what their path was. For me personally, I mean, ultimately, most people, I would say, get into it because they have an interest in microphones and recording technology, and maybe they dabbled in it a little bit, and that one thing led to another, and they started doing it as a profession. So for me personally, I started a few years after Andres was pummeling me with ice hockey pucks.
I remember that well.
A few years after that, we all started picking up musical instruments.
That's right.
And for me, I play stringed instruments, mostly guitars. Later, I moved on to ukuleles and other things. And my dad had an old reel-to-reel tape recorder. and a microphone or two to plug into it. And so I started dabbling with, what if I plug the microphone in and then play my guitar and then record it, and had big old VU meters I could watch and play it back. And so it sort of started from there. I was kind of fascinated by the technology, and then over time I realized that I had a bit of a knack for it.
I would interject here and say that Mike's work is something that the Two Reel Cinema crowd has heard again and again.
I was going to ask.
Yes, on the opening theme, we use a piece called Mud Season, which not only did Michael record many years ago and many years later than what he's talking about right now, but he also plays guitar on that. And then
man.
We also use a piece of a track called The Day the Tube Broke Down, which Michael recorded. And if we recorded that song so many times that I don't know if he also played guitar on that one as well. So we're using your work without permission, honestly, week after week after week.
We actually owe you a lot of money, Mike.
Excellent.
It's actually the best part of the show. It's probably the best work, best thing that you hear on any given show. So Mike's work is familiar to us and to our audiences as well.
I'm glad that I caught up to, so I guess we can settle up when we're done talking as far as the financials go. Yeah.
Just to be clear, we weren't paying you anything for this interview, but
right.
we will pay you the rights on the song.
So wait a second, but how does it move from recording some instruments on a 2-track to then recording sound for a feature film? What are the steps that lead from A to Z there?
Okay. Well, for my path, and like I said, it can be different for others, and often is, but my path was I went to college and decided to study filmmaking as a general direction. And while I was an undergraduate, I discovered pretty quickly that the graduate students, who all had projects of their own, they always needed a sound person. And in film school, everyone wants to be a director or they want to be a cameraman. Nobody really wants to do the sound except for the few kind of nerdy people off to the side. And so I discovered that I did my own projects, but I realized I could work on a higher level on the graduate student projects and learn that much more and get a little more experience doing that. So I started doing that, and then as friends in school were graduating and moving into the professional realm, it just, from that point on, it really becomes a series of a lifelong series of networking.
Right.
So as far as like my actual training, I did take classes in a few classes in audio recording. Not at the time in the school that I went to, there weren't any classes dedicated to sound for film. There might be 1 or 2 days dedicated as part of a greater class on filmmaking in general, but not an entire course to it. So I just realized while I was at the college level that my best choice or my best way forward was to just get as much experience as possible. Working with people.
Must have made you a very popular person, because no one needs another director, no one needs another writer, but you always need lots of sound people, I suppose.
And then that also helped me refine another difficult but necessary technique of how to turn down work, but yet not burn any bridges.
Well, I got to say that it seems to me like your life, you've got a great trajectory. It's pretty straight. It's pretty right on. It's you kind of knew what you were going to do, and you seem suited to it. Jimmy's an anesthesiologist or an anesthetist, as they say over there. Jimmy, did you know that you were going to be an anesthetist when you were 12 years old or something like that?
Absolutely no idea. Couldn't even spell it when I was 12. No, exactly, no idea.
Or as a student in school, I never thought I'd be a teacher. But I've got to say that Michael did these tremendous things when we were younger. I still can't figure it out, but he was track recording. You said 2-track, but Jimmy, we were working long before there was really like a Tascam recorder or something like that. So Michael would actually bounce from sort of cassette to cassette, and I could never figure out what he was doing, but he would track just using a couple of different cassette players. And then, you could see Michael's growth just right through high school, playing in bands, recording everybody, recording a couple different bands, and then also just going on to university and then just immediately getting work as a sound person after that. So it's a fairly straight trajectory in terms of a career, and it's led you to a very long list of films. If you look at, as I said before, Mike's listings in IMDb, and by the way, all three of us here on the Two Reel Cinema Club today are listed on IMDb. I'm a stunt driver is my one credit. James has an extensive writing credit, but Michael's list of films, I mean, if you do go look at Michael Primmer on IMDb, you're going to see hundreds. I think you're well over 150, 160 films and projects.
Is it that much? I don't know.
It's super long, and I wonder, I mean, that's so consistent. I mean, I wonder if you're getting tired of it a little bit, and I think that's one of James's questions for later on, but you've just been doing it. I mean, when you think about it, I'll reveal your age. He's 54 years old now, ladies and gentlemen, and so you've been doing sound on one way or another, in one form or another for 40 years, I suspect.
The thing that I find, one of the many fascinating things about this is that it's like, the key to having a successful career is saying yes to everything when you get the chance to say yes, and then cleverly learning to say no skillfully once you've said yes enough times. Yeah. Did you find in those early days, were you hustling like mad to get work? Or because you were the guy who could do it and was available to do it, did you find that people were seeking you out quite early on?
No, I would actually say it was neither one of those situations.
Okay.
It was more a matter of kind of luck and timing. Because, and by that I mean I don't feel like I'm a particularly good hustler, and I was not always pursuing jobs, even maybe when I should have been. But back to what I mentioned earlier about the networking, it was really about that. Connecting with other people who were friends, but I also felt like, oh, this person's going somewhere, I'm definitely going to stay in touch with them. And then, a job might arise, and then making the choice to do it or not. But definitely in the earlier days, I was saying yes more often than not, but it was mostly due to the connection that I had to the person that was offering it.
There's a famous joke in kind of British medical circles. If you want to work as a successful anaesthetist, especially working privately in the UK, people say you need the 3 A's. They say you need to be available, you need to be affable, and you need to be able. And people say out of those three, by far the least important of the three for success in your career is ability. That actually, just as long as if people can get on with you and you pick up the phone, you know what, you can make a career out of it. And this is a useful bit of advice. Sounds to me like for anybody trying to embark on any career.
Well, I would say, I'm guessing that probably applies to just about all professions, and certainly does to sound recording, because I would say that I'm definitely not the most technically gifted, and I certainly know others who I find it shocking that they're working at all. And so and it runs the full gamut, in between.
Yeah, but in that business, you just got to constantly be working with new technology. I mean, I don't think you ever worked with 8-track, but you certainly worked with cassettes, right? And then moved into probably VHS and SVHS, and then on to digital. And so you worked in so many different mediums over the years, right?
Well, by 8-track, I never did record anything with an 8-track cartridge, if that's what you mean. But if you may recall that some of our recordings were technically 8-track.
Oh, I guess, yeah, that's true.
On the old, this is on that rare machine, the 1-inch analog 8-track.
Yeah.
But yeah, not the 8-track cartridge. New technology is interesting, and it's definitely interesting to see like what old technology, how long it can linger on and still be viable. And something and other things just kind of come and go, but technology is a fun aspect of it, I guess.
I mean, I'm a terrible nerd. I would love to know what kit you find yourself using these days. I mean, I'd be interested to know whether is it always the same kit? Is it your own kit? Do you take your own kit and you're responsible for it? Or do you have to just use what the sound department provides? What do you use?
It depends on the project. But it's very typical that the sound person will provide their own equipment. Now, if I'm working on a big movie, it's typically the sound mixer is the head of the department of recording sound during production, and so they're in charge of choosing the gear, and it's primarily all of theirs. Occasionally, and so if I'm second in command, which would be a boom operator, I will bring a little bit of kit, but the vast majority would be the sound mixer's kit. Now, when I'm working on much smaller things, corporate videos or documentaries, if I'm working, so then those situations I'm working on my own as a single person department, then it's pretty much all my kit. Unless there's the oddball piece of equipment that I don't have, and maybe I'll rent that item or borrow it for a special, for one day or for a special event or something.
So have you got a cupboard full of microphones at home?
Yeah. And I say that a bit, I don't know if reluctantly or just, it's one of those things that a independent contractor such as myself of any persuasion, but definitely for a sound person, how many is enough is a question. And it's something to struggle with,
Do you have a Yeti Blue? Because they don't know it, but they actually sponsor our program.
I don't, but you know what? For a small fee, I would be gladly test one out.
Well, do you have a favorite mic? Can you name drop it now? What's your go-to? What's the first thing you reach for in the cupboard?
Well, I think there's a variety of microphones, and any one of them can be the right choice in the right moment. So I don't think that there's one microphone that's good for everything.
Okay.
So in this instance, for me talking into a microphone for just a straight human voice, I definitely think that a Schoeps microphone, and in this case, I'm talking into a Schoeps. The preamp is a CMC5, and the microphone capsule is an MK41, and that combination is a very typical microphone setup for movies and videos. A lot of feature film dialogue will be recorded with that setup, and I find that it's the most natural sounding microphone for the human voice, and especially in a quiet room, even if it's a little bit noisy, it still might be the right choice. And so I use that. I would say I use that microphone. I would probably say I use it most often, and I also use that for all interviews. So in a documentary or corporate video or any kind of it's a typical what you'd call like a typical sit down interview when you're looking at someone, a talking head. For me, Schoeps is the go-to microphone, hands down.
Would you be happy to stick that on the end of a boom arm as well? Is that the word, boom arm, or is that a tautology? Is it a boom or an arm?
Well, no, it's a boom or a pole.
Right, okay. What an amateur I am. I apologize.
Yeah. So you could call it a boom pole, or sometimes we just say get the pole. But for certain, absolutely on the end of a boom, it would be a great choice. Now, there's another microphone that I prefer in dramatic productions for dialogue, and that's made by Sennheiser. It's the MKH50. And it's a very similar microphone to the Schoeps, similar in pattern, but it has different characteristics to the sound. It's a little, for lack of a better description, it's a little beefier sounding. And I find that when people are acting, there's a much greater dynamic range than when people are sitting talking for an interview. And I find that Sennheiser microphone is much better at capturing the nuances of the quieter moments and then the louder moments as well. And and for me, it sounds best for dialogue, for dramatic dialogue. But oddly enough, when I put it over someone's head when they're just doing an interview, it doesn't sound right. And a Sheps is the one that sounds right.
That sounds so. It's like the Al Pacino microphones, where he does like the sentences that start out really, really quiet. Then he starts shouting halfway through.
Yes,
you need a microphone that will do both of those ends.
Yeah. Yes. He's something else. That guy.
And what are you plugging your mics into? Is it still like a Nagra? That's the name at the back of my mind. A Nagra. That's what the people at film school were using. Does that still exist?
Right.
Is that still a thing?
It still exists. I don't think they're I'm fairly certain they're not actually manufacturing any. I don't. But I couldn't put a year on what year they stopped. They're definitely a bit of a rarity now. There are clubs, the enthusiasts. But what's amazing is to record on them. They still sound. I mean, they sound amazing. But the problems with them for daily use now is they're big, they're heavy, and they record in analog, and really only at most will record 2 tracks. So for any now it's most common for everything to be multi-track. And digital for certain, because it's easier in the field and it's definitely easier in post.
But before there was Zoom, the video program, I think there was a Zoom microphone. Is that correct too?
Yeah.
Does anyone use those anymore?
Well, there's a Zoom. I don't know if you'd call it a microphone. It's a Zoom.
It's a recorder, I guess.
Yeah, I think the company is called Zoom, and they make a couple of products, handheld recorders. I think they typically have a built-in microphone, and then you can plug in a microphone, and they make one that plugs in 2 or one that plugs in 4. It's kind of a prosumer item. I don't know if I would. I don't even know if I should say kind of. Yeah, this is me poo-pooing.
Wait, prosumer, that suggests.
Let's just say I don't have one in my kit.
So what do you record into? I feel like you're about to say my iPhone, but I'm sure that's not the answer. It's not what you recorded.
No, I have tried that and experimented with that, but well, there's a couple. There's the company that I have recorders is Sound Devices is the name of the company, and I have a couple of their products. And in fact, right now I'm recording on one that's called a Mix Pre. And it's a little 3-input digital recorder.
I like the idea of a company called Sound Devices. It's like they all got into the boardroom and had many hour-long session trying to figure out what should we call the company?
Yes.
What do we produce?
Yes. I mean, it's kind of it's genius. You state the obvious, but yet somehow it sounds new and fresh.
I have a question for you, and maybe it leads to another one. Purely a guesstimate here. How many miles of cable have you coiled in your career?
Oh man! If I had $1 for every mile of cable I recorded or rolled, I don't know. I mean, it goes on. But
probably moon and back, right?
But that's decreasing because nowadays the heavy reliance on wireless technology. Yeah. So cable coiling is no longer as necessary. It's still done.
But it's not a lost art. Yeah, people still do it, right?
Yeah, the kids coming up don't necessarily know the over-under.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah. You taught me that, and I've always done it that way, and I see so much cable poorly coiled, and it just drives me crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's problematic. But as far as back to your question about the gear or the recorder, everything needs to be multi-track nowadays. And even in like a documentary
but I presume you only have one microphone at the end of the boom. So what are all the other tracks used for?
Well, okay, if I'm just doing a sit-down interview, I'll have a microphone on a boom pole over the head of the person talking. But I'll also have a wireless microphone, a lavalier, on their person. That's a little bit of a backup, kind of a safety. It's kind of over the years. It's become expected that you have that for safety purposes. It might be that they lean forward, and they're out of the pattern of the boom microphone, or maybe there's a problem with it or whatnot. It's just pretty common practice. So in that very simple situation, I'll have two microphones. Now, if you're recording a dramatic scene for a movie, and let's say you have a scene where there's 4 speaking characters, well, each one of them is going to wear a wireless microphone.
Right.
Okay. And then you're going to have a boom microphone that, in the ideal world, you would capture the whole scene with the one boom microphone. Now, as is typical in life, you might have one person sitting on the couch and another person walking around over by the TV set or wherever. So now, if they're both talking at the same time, you can't have one microphone recording them both.
Right.
So now you would employ a second boom. So a second person holding a boom pole, following, and then if you have 4 people talking, well, then you have to figure out which boom person is recording which line of dialogue and when.
Oh boy!
And then it's up to the sound mixer to figure that, or to know that, and fade up the correct microphone at the right time.
Right. Oof.
Now, it might be that the person who's walking around by the TV set, now they leave and go into the kitchen to the counter to get something. And now that second boom, because it can't go into the kitchen with them because they would be in the shot, right? So now maybe you hide another microphone, another boom microphone, but it's not on a pole. It might be on a little stand, or it might be just taped to the wall or something. And that we call that a plant mic. Sort of in reference, because it's been planted there. It's kind of a reference to, hide the microphone behind the plant, which I've done plenty of times, by the way.
Yeah. I was hoping it would be a real plant.
Yes,
yeah, right.
I mean, if you ever if you're watching a scene in any show and they have a very wide shot, maybe in someone sitting at a desk, I can guarantee you that there's a microphone hidden somewhere on that desk. It might be behind the computer screen. It might be under the telephone. It might be behind the potted plant. You never know. But so, anyways, that would be yet a third boom microphone. It's very specialized. They only need it for that one time that the actor goes into the kitchen and says the line.
Sure. And
then he comes back out by the TV, and then the second boom can pick that up. In my hypothetical scenario, but you see what I mean? Like you can have many. That's how you can introduce multiple microphones,
right?
And therefore
you can't have too many tracks.
And therefore the need for multi-tracks, because in addition to this, everyone's wearing their lavalier microphone.
Yep.
And you might say, "Oh, that sounds like overkill," but and sometimes it is, but that's kind of what we do.
Better overkill than underkill. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's much better, as you guys probably know, making this podcast. When you get into post-production and listening to the end result, you hear a certain part and you're like, "Oh, it's really good," except for that one spot, and then you think like, "Oh, could we have done something different?" Well, if we had the microphone over on that side of the table, we would have gotten that one line when he left, and you know what I mean. Yeah. So, anyways, therein lies the need for multi-track.
Unfortunately, I was going to say for that one spot on our podcast is usually the entire time that I'm talking throughout the podcast. There's very little we can do.
We could just eliminate that talking business,
right?
And the whole thing would be improving in quality enormously. So Andrew's referred to. I know I'm hogging all the questions because I'm utterly fascinated by this. I'm sorry, I will move over in a second, I promise. But I got to ask this. So Andrew's referred to like 150 entries on the IMDb.
Yeah.
I know this is crass and fanboyish, but Mike, what you done? What you done? Come on, what you done?
You mean you want me to name them? That's the hard part. Is
that allowed? Is that bad manners?
Of course, it's allowed, and that's all the self promotion, and that's the difficulty. But the hard part is actually remembering most of them, because they all kind of blend into each other.
And I love the way that I mentioned Al Pacino there.
Yeah.
And after I mentioned him, I realized, damn, maybe Mike has actually recorded Al Pacino, and I shouldn't be making this kind of crass, dumbass jokes.
No, that's okay. He I did record him. I worked on a movie with him a few years ago.
All right, I should have kept my mouth shut.
No, it's all good. I found him to be. I mean, he's quite entertaining, as you could imagine his persona. He can be that way in off camera as well. It's a, he's a funny, dramatic fellow. But I have a funny story that it was a movie with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. I'll just say that.
Well, there aren't many of those.
There's not many, so you can go from there. On this movie, I can't remember the reason why, but I started the job a few days or maybe even a week late. So they had already started shooting before I joined.
No.
But
I've got this mental image now. They've shot a week's worth of footage and they're saying, "Oh no, we can't hear anything. There's no sound.
Yes.
What's missing?"
Well, no. I had a replacement, a colleague filling in for me, and so when I came in to take over and finish the remainder of the job, she shared with me what the director said on day one, and the director told everyone he had basically a meeting before the first shot, welcoming everyone to the job. Thanks for coming. Blah 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 blah, and he laid down kind of the rules of the way he likes to operate. And the number one rule was that no one, no matter what the circumstance, should ever call cut other than him. That was the like absolute number one rule, because he likes to let the camera roll, and and it's true, sometimes when you think a shot is done, some magic might happen. They might riff or come up with a new line or something but or whatever. Maybe they've blown the shot and then they want to restart it, and he doesn't want to cut. He just wants to keep rolling. So anyways, that was the rule. So I come into the job, and my friend tells me this before. I said, "How did the week go?" She's like, "Oh, it went pretty well, but you got to know that the director said this on day one." I'm like, "Okay, no problem." So literally on my first day of working, and I don't think it was the first shot, but it was definitely during the first day. Now, on this job, I was working as the boom operator. So my immediate boss is the sound mixer, and he's back at a cart with the recorder. And through the magic of our technology, he has a private microphone line where he can talk into it, and I can hear it in my headphones, and no one else can hear it. So we're in the middle of a take with Al, delivering some, genius dialogue. And as we're rolling, my friend, who is my boss, starts talking to me in my headphones, and he says, "Oh no, the machine stopped recording. We're not recording the machine. It shut down. I have to reboot. I have to reboot the machine." Right? He's telling me this in my headphones, and so. And we're shooting film, so there's no backup recording. There's no safety track on the video camera or anything. It's all double system. So in my mind, he's telling me this, and I think we have to cut because we're not rolling at all. It's not that the sound is bad. It's not because there's an airplane coming or something that would be something that I would think is detrimental to the sound. But there actually is no sound, because we're not recording. So I decide, I think that my friend is telling me that we have to cut. So I say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we have to cut. I'm sorry, we have to cut. We're not recording. We have a technical problem." It was a great moment. So the director comes out. steam coming out of his ears. Like, what the hell has happened? Who called cut? And here I am, the new guy in his mind, because even though I was hired for the job, I started late, so now I'm the new guy. I have to explain to him that, well, I'm really sorry, but we're not actually recording any, like, it's not that the sound is bad. There is no sound. The machine stopped. It stopped recording, and we have to reboot it. He then goes on at least 5-minute, I dare say 10-minute rant about how awful this is to his method and how incredibly genius Al Pacino is at looping, which is the common practice of replacing your dialogue that was recorded on set. You re-record it later. And typically to do that, you have to have, even if the recording is bad on the original day, at least presumably you can hear the lines, and they usually need that so they can do the looping and make it in sync with what the picture is. But since there's no sound, I'm thinking, well, he won't be able to loop it because there's no sound to match the picture. Anyways, that was day one. I would say that it was not the most pleasurable experience, that movie. But I'm told that Al Pacino is incredible at looping. So after he finished his 5 to 10 minute rant, he then, and me looking very earnest, because I can produce that kind of look, he looked at me and said, "Don't ever do that again." And then he went back and we did the next take. I wasn't fired from the job, but
Phew.
But by the end of week 2, I then wished that I had been fired from the job, because the remainder of the shoot proved to be extremely unpleasant for a variety of other reasons. But I don't like to get too personal.
But would he have been more angry to run this entire take and then learn that there was no sound whatsoever? I mean, it seems kind of immature.
Well, that's essentially what I was thinking. Even though he doesn't want me to yell cut, he'll be infinitely happier later because there's no sound for Al to loop to. Anyways.
Yeah, and that way he doesn't fall in love with some long take that he can't use, or he's not burning film when he doesn't need to. It just seems ridiculous.
Now,
so,
this may be terribly rude. I may be breaking all the conventions of polite discourse in the sound recording world, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and I'm going to expect a rebuke if this is the wrong thing to ask. Is the film you're talking about Heat?
No.
Right, okay, fine. Only because I was going to say that a friend of mine went to see Heat, and the thing he really absolutely raved about was how great the sound was. And I was just on the cusp of telling you, well, you know what? The one thing that really impressed my friend about that film was the sound.
Yeah. No, I can probably guarantee that your friend didn't see the film that I'm referring to. Okay. But I'm told the sound was great.
Nice.
Goes without saying.
Yes.
I was going to kind of ask you, out of the gigs that you've done, what were some of the highlights? What were some of the lowlights? We've covered it all in the same Al Pacino film.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when people ask me that question. I have to say that I compartmentalize experiences, and so some films stand out with highlights because of the location or the circumstances, and other films stand out because they were great films or good films. I don't know. So in terms of those highlights, location wise, I've been on some really fun jobs. Interstellar was one. Because we spent a bit of time in Iceland, which is a place that I love, and that was really fun. It was super challenging, but a really great experience. Got to fly in a helicopter for part of that, and hike around on a glacier, and that bit was
So
fun.
I got to ask you then, if it's Interstellar, you're another film which has an enormous reputation for sound.
Yeah.
So were you recording the dialogue during those, very loud scenes where, the rocket is taking off and you can't really hear what people are saying because you're not supposed to be able to hear what people are saying. You're supposed to be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of this bloody rocket.
Yeah, the very loud scenes where you can't hear anyone talking, but you know they are. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but
that is fantastic.
But
props to you. Brilliant.
I would say this, though, in case anyone has any doubt about this. When we recorded those lines of dialogue, we weren't actually in a rocket that was taking off.
Oh my God, I was entirely seduced by the magic of cinema.
Yes. So, I'm saying that because just to make you aware that the fact that you can't hear what the people are saying doesn't reflect on the sound that was recorded when they were saying it. Yeah. That was someone else's choice.
So, right, yeah. Absolutely, but I have a lot of issues with Interstellar from a story perspective, and it's usually story and writing and character is what we talk about on the pod.
Yeah.
But I think actually the sound design, for all of his films, has been actually pretty amazing. Props to you. I think actually, it's not often that I have seen a film and I come away with a very strong impression about the sound. And in part, I think maybe that's a little bit like coming away from a film where you don't have a very strong impression of the music means the music has done its job, because the film isn't about the music. It's about the music helping you to tell the story, and the story is the important part of the film. But I did come away from Interstellar with a very strong impression of the sound and the effect that the sound had on me and the way that the sound worked. I think I would imagine, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes for 5 seconds, if there's any film where you feel that the sound recordist has made a major contribution to the way that the film plays and has its effect, it's blooming Interstellar, isn't it? Incredible.
Well, I don't know if that's a complicated answer, but I would disagree in that, because what you're hearing as a viewer is largely created by the sound designer and the director.
And do you take any role in that, or have you taken any role in that in some productions?
Generally, no. What I do is I do the recording. I do the recording during the shooting. So when the actors are delivering their lines, I do the recording of that, and then basically hand it off to another whole team of people who work in post, clean up all the mistakes, and then add in the sound effects, and then add in the score that someone else produced, and then that's all mixed, and everything else is done by another whole team.
But that team wouldn't have anything to do if you didn't do your job properly. They would be out of a job.
Perhaps, but but there is the magic of looping, as I said before, or referred to before.
Right.
And there's certainly all those times in movies when there's no talking that they want to fill with something. It might be musical score, it might be sound effects, it could be a combination, and so there's lots to do. I feel like what I'm contributing is the basic ingredient. So
yeah, the main ingredient.
When we're shooting, when we're shooting, the dialogue is the most important thing. If there's a particularly cool sound or sound effect, we try to record that as best we can. Sometimes we'll do that separately from the camera, but if it's in the shot, maybe, and it seems like it's a featured thing, we'll try to capture it at that point also. And then all of that is to help the sound post department, which is usually a sound designer and sound editors, help them experience what it was in the moment that the actors were acting, and then they will use that as basically a blueprint to build upon. And in some cases, by the time you get to the final product, the blueprint is completely obscured and there's nothing left of it. In other cases, it might be quite prominent, and it just depends on the type of film and the style of film. I'll give you an example. I worked on a film that will be coming out later this year. It's called The Killer, and the director is David Fincher, who I've worked with a couple of times, and he is very similar to Christopher Nolan. He's very particular about how his films look, but also how they sound, and he's very focused on that. So in this movie, The Killer, the main character, there's very, very little dialogue. It's like 120, 130 page script, and there's probably, I think, four scenes that have like key dialogue in it.
Oh, I like it already.
There's a lot of sitting around and hanging. Well, there's also a lot of voiceover, which we recorded. But
I like it less now.
Ultimately, they'll do a better recording of the voiceover. But my point is there's a lot of the movie where it's kind of sound effects and just the sound of the environment that you're in, whatever the action is, right? I mean, there are big moments of action, a couple of fight scenes and a chase scene, but there's a lot of very static moments as well. And the sound is going to be, I think it's going to be amazing. But a lot of that had very little to do with me. And what we did try to do, we spent days and days and sometimes weeks shooting where there was no dialogue at all. And we were there to basically record the scratch tracks, quite literally. So we're recording, and so then we're really focused on, what's the cool sound? What's the sound effect? Oh, the door is creaking, or he comes in and he slams down this, or he's building a gun, and the mechanical sounds of the putting together of the parts. Let's record all these cool sounds. And what we were doing was trying to record the best we could of those sounds in the moment, and all of that 100% is not what you're going to hear in the movie.
Yeah,
because that's all replaced by the sound designer and his team to put in super precise and very pristine sound effects. So for instance, we did this what was it? There was an old typewriter on a desk, and no, it wasn't a typewriter. This is a bad story. We're going to cut this out. You're going to cut this out. Let me give you a better example, because I can't think of what it was. But my point is that there was this device on a desk in the middle of this dialogue scene, and it might have been the intercom. I can't remember. No, but you're going to cut this out. But I'll just tell you now, just because it's funny.
No, we're not.
But the sound was a little bit annoying. And we're like, Fincher, can we turn this off or get rid of this, and or something like that? And he's like, don't worry about it, I'm replacing that. I'm like, oh, you're gonna replace it? You're gonna re-record it? And he's like, he didn't want to re-record that actual, because I think I suggested, we can record it wild, and by that I mean separate from the camera, and get a really good recording of it. And he didn't mean to. Right. He didn't want to replace it that way. He wanted to actually change the sound itself, because he hated the sound that it was making. So he was going to have the sound designer come up with a better sound. But that's a bad story for your podcast. But it's a funny moment.
What I particularly love about that story is it illustrates that you call David Fincher when you're working with him.
Well, sometimes I do. It depends. It depends. Depends on the moment. There are moments when I might say that. There are other times when I will. Most of the time, I'll call him David.
Right.
Fincher is a little more casual.
How about Mr. Fincher?
No, we're beyond that. I don't think he wants. I mean, he doesn't want anyone to call him Mr. Fincher. He definitely prefers to be called David. But
and like Fincher, Mr. Fincher, is kind of notorious, as far as I'm aware, of doing 70 takes of every shot.
Yeah.
Do you end up? I'm just curious to know how this works. how do you label 70 different audio tracks for the same? I mean, I presume it's all synced up, isn't it? But do you end up with 70 recordings of somebody opening a door?
Yes, you do. And can you distinguish any of those if you're just listening to them? Probably not. But on the recorder, I mean, I don't know. I guess if you're not, I mean, I'm trying to think. You're recording on Logic.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I think. Okay, but when you're recording on a digital, any digital platform, ultimately you're going to get a file, right? And so each file will have a distinct name. So on devices that are designed for recording in the field, they're set up so you can type in the name of the file or the name of the scene, and then it can also demark a take number. So the whole file name will have a scene name and a take number. So, for instance, this might be scene 62 Apple. And then you do 70 takes of it. Well, you have 62 Apple take 1, and then take 2, and then each file that's recorded on the device has a distinct name. Yeah.
And what does the word Apple refer to there?
Oh, sorry. Oh, that's film speak. So when you're filming a scene on the script, each scene is given a number, usually starting with 1, and then you carry on through to the end. Right. So so now we're in scene 62. Well, in scene 62, you might have a wide shot of what's happening, and then you go in. Then you have a separate shot that's a close up, and then a close up of the other character, and then you might have a close up of the gun that they're looking at, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like you have all these different shots that are all part of scene 62. So the film language that was developed, 100 years ago, literally, to keep track of it all for the editors to make sense of it, you give each one, and this is one of the jobs of the script supervisor, is to keep track of all that. In order to keep track of the film footage, you'd say, okay, the first shot we do of scene 62, we will call scene 62. Then the next, and then we might do 62. We might do 5 takes of that, or however many. Now that's the wide shot. Now, if we want to go in and do the close up, well, it's the same scene, but it's a totally different shot. So how do you write that down and keep a log of what it is? And so they came up, well, let's just give the next camera position a letter. And so we just go through the alphabet. And I want to say that the European way is numerical. They won't use Apple. They would do like 62-1, 62-2, but it doesn't make as much sense to do that, in my opinion. But anyways, so that's why you might have 62 Apple, 62 Baker, 62 Charlie. So,
Mike, did you see Everything Everywhere All at Once last year?
I did.
Because I am pretty sure that for a lot of scenes in that movie, there were more than 26 setups.
Oh, yes.
And I wonder what happens when they get to set up 27 for scene 62.
Yeah, after you go to,
what are we going to call this now?
Yeah, after Z or Zebra, then you double up. Then you go Apple.
Yeah.
Apple.
Yeah, then Apple Baker, Apple Charlie, Apple, and then worst case scenario, you could go Baker, Apple, Baker, Charlie. So you've got and that's where the numerical system isn't useful. The alphabetical, you can really you can kind of go on forever.
A little bit like Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the difficulty with a film like that is you have scenes that are probably the same scene, but they appear in multiple moments in the movie. So that's a real script supervisor struggle to keep track of all that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing when you're working with David Fincher, when you're working with Christopher Nolan, I guess these are like sort of 50, 60-day shoots. How many days do you think you work in the average year? How often are you actually out at work? Okay, you're very welcome to tell me that's none of your business.
I would say that number, for me, it tends to vary maybe more than the average Hollywood sound person, probably. Simply because I don't I don't know. I guess I feel like I don't work that much. And in this year in particular, that's technically true. I haven't worked very much this year. But in the pre-COVID world, 100 days is pretty good.
Cool. Okay.
But that might be a little bit, depending. It might be a little bit low. And then and it kind of depends. If I do a really long movie, then after that maybe I do some documentary and corporate work, and then it really spreads out and gets a little thin. Other people who do sound recording, like say, someone who's dedicated, like a professional boom operator, that's what they do. They might finish one movie and then immediately start on the next one. And then when they're done with that, then they might pick up some days on a TV show for a few months or what, so they'll really pack in many more days than I do. I tend to take on if I have a long project, I try not to do another one right afterwards. I try to have a little bit of a break.
It's good for your mental health.
I'm going to guess that in those 100 days, a lot of them are long days and a half, 2 days at once.
Yeah.
So it's probably closer to 150 or 200 days.
Oh yeah, if you want hours. Right? I mean, I would say, well, let's see, in 2022, I worked 800, no, I was about to say 850 hours. I think it might have been more than that, but the days tend to get really crazy long.
And is there much downtime during the day, or are you at it every hour, no matter what?
That can vary a lot depending on the production. If you're working on episodic television, they have a tighter shooting schedule, so the days tend to be more packed. Which in one hand is good because it makes the day go by a little quicker. Feature films usually have, if they're like a normal or full budget, they'll have a little bit more leeway, a little bit more time to set things up. So therefore, the lighting might take longer because it might be bigger, or they might be able to just want to take more time to finesse it. Sometimes the shots are more complicated, and so they're going to take more time setting up the camera in its position and going in. And if it's a complicated move, like if the camera is moving around a lot, they might have to rehearse that a lot. So, in those moments, there can be some downtime, sometimes significant downtime. So kind of, it's hard to give a good answer, but in general, episodic TV moves pretty quickly, more quickly than movies or feature films.
Michael, I was going to say, in my head, I just assume that all directors call the sound people Mike. Because it's so convenient, it's so appropriate. And I wonder, is that like a shortcut, or is it because of your enduring influence on the industry? Like they all think, hey, where's that Mike guy? I like that Mike guy.
No.
Do people just automatically call you Mike on a set, and then you say, yeah, that is my name, as a matter of fact?
No, they don't, because they know that the mic is what I'm holding. So if they don't know my name, and there are a few of those type of directors, they'll just say hey sound.
Oh really? Oh.
Sometimes they might say hey boom or boom guy.
Boom guy.
But I would think that you're kind of one of the people who's always in a scene and always on a set. So they must.
Yeah.
People obviously, Fincher, as you said before, he knows you. He must call you Mike, for example, because you're probably one of the five people who's really in every scene.
Yeah, and again, it depends on the director. There are some directors who are totally oblivious of those that work for them, and there's other directors who are truly aware of the creative element, collaborative creative element to what they're doing, and so you can get a little bit of both. Some you know what I mean? Like some directors are really aware and care about who's around them. There are some directors, David Fincher is one of them. Christopher Nolan's another, where they really try to hire. Like once they find the people that they like, they try to rehire those same people. And I would like, for example, to cite Christopher Nolan. I don't want to talk about him too much, but because I don't think he actually liked me, but I will say this as far as this topic and knowing someone's name and knowing who they want around the camera. There was a moment on Interstellar when we were shooting in the farmhouse, and we had done like sort of the heavy dialogue part of a scene or something, and we were switching to do a different scene which only involved one actor who wasn't talking, and they were moving around the room. Anyways, so there was no dialogue for the scene that was coming up, and then for some reason, there was something that was on our storage truck that was away from the set that I needed to go get and look at, and it might have been preparing for the next day. I can't remember what it was, but for whatever reason, I said to my boss, the sound mixer, I was like, I'm going to go out to the truck and find that thing we were talking about, and I'm going to have our sound utility guy replace me on set and do this shot because there's no dialogue and I think it's okay for me to step away. So I went away off to the truck, and the next thing I know, they're calling me on the walkie-talkie. They're like, "You got to get in here. You got to get in here. Get in here right now, Chris. He doesn't want to shoot until you're back." And and because he's just he knows what his comfort zone is, and if there's something different in it, if there's a different person in the room, like it sort of changes the dynamic or whatever. And in this case, and he also is in the room. He's literally right next to the camera. A lot of directors will be in another room, down the hall, wherever, sitting in front of a video monitor looking, but he stands right next to the camera. And if it's just the camera operator and the assistant camera operator who pulls the focus, and then and then the boom operator, like if it's just these 3-4 people in the room, he's quite aware of who they are, what they're doing, what they should be doing, and hey, wait a minute, why isn't that Mike guy here? Why is his additional person here? So, there are other directors who that wouldn't bother them at all.
It's nice to be appreciated.
Mm-hmm. It goes a long ways. When you're getting yelled at and taking abuse, you can remember those little moments. Well, he liked me yesterday when he wanted me to be around. So,
so what is your ideal project? Who would you love to work with again, or who is it who phones up and you always take their call? And and you will kind of drop everything and go and work with this guy or this crew or this woman, or is there anybody who comes top of your list?
Well, I guess this would be at the top of my list because there haven't been that many that I've worked with multiple times. But David Fincher is one of them, and I do like working with him, and I would I pretty much always for the most part, take the job. I think they maybe only turned down one, but it's a very difficult environment. But I like working with him. It can be stressful, and like I said, it can be very difficult and challenging. But for some reason, I seem to, but I do enjoy it. He's. But there are other situations that I absolutely wished I had more of. Wish certain directors had more movies or movies they would hire me on, but oh well. Didn't happen.
There's still time. There's still time.
Yeah.
Well, I've got one last question. Well, we not seldom end up kind of pussyfooting around a bit of socialism on the podcast. So I was going to ask you: have you been affected by the writers' strike? Is there a union? Are you in the union? Does the union do you any favors?
Pretty much yes to all of those questions.
Okay, excellent. And moving on.
So yeah,
carry on. Yeah.
In the States anyway, it primarily people belong to a union. In this case, it's IATSE, which is International Alliance for Stage and Theatrical Employees. And all the technical crafts belong under that umbrella. The writers going on strike has absolutely affected all of us because it's certain jobs have either shut down or new jobs coming up haven't started up. I was actually working on an episodic TV show in May when the strike began, and we started getting picketed at our locations, and that created quite a bit of complications. So it's problematic, but in general, I'm definitely in support of what they're fighting for. I'm in a labor union and a proud member of the labor union and support their. Even though they're in a different union, I support them because we have to work together to a certain extent in this industry.
Yeah.
But it's definitely created a headache, and that goes back to what I alluded to earlier of not working very much this year.
So what you're saying in a roundabout fashion is that if you get thrown out onto the street because you can't pay the rent, it's basically our fault.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at this point, I mean, it's everyone. I think everyone plays. I mean, in this industry, and like any industry, but particularly in film, there's a lot of varying levels of employees and people involved, and you want to see everyone treated fairly at their level.
Right. Yep.
Some people complain about some craft people, what we refer to as, or what is referred to as below the line
right.
people.
Yep.
The technicians. Everyone's kind of upset. We're out of work. We're having to take the financial brunt of this situation, and it's not our contract is not expired. And why are these writers complaining? They make all this money, and maybe some writers make a lot more money than I do, but there's a lot of writers who don't. And nonetheless, their issues and their means of making money are different than mine, even though it's part of the same industry. So I still have to be supportive of their efforts for their means of making money to be fair and treated fairly, because ultimately this is a very wealthy industry, and the people who own the means of production have a lot of money, and there's a lot of money being made, and are they sharing that? Are we getting what should be part of the end result?
Oh man, it moves my heart to hear a little bit of Karl Marx on the podcast again. That's fantastic. I feel
too much Tom Hanks and not enough Karl Marx of late, huh?
Yes. Well, I'm a big fan of Billy Bragg, and he's he's been right there with me side by side the whole time. So it's
good. He's a good friend of the pod too, Billy Bragg. Yes.
Friend of the pod.
I have one last question, and it kind of has to do with names. It's a silly question. Most of my questions are not sensible. But, my one IMDb credit, which I do talk about a lot on the pod, just sort of appeared magically.
Right.
Whereas when you've got hundreds like yourself, sometimes I notice you're Michael Primmer. I've seen you as Michael E. Primmer. Do you decide that, or does someone just magically make those credits appear?
The unfortunate.
And have you ever been Michael Edward Primmer too? Maybe.
I don't think it's ever been listed as Michael Edward, but IMDb is a great thing. It's the sort of de facto resume for people nowadays. A lot of times you don't have to have a resume; you just tell them, they look you up on IMDb, and that's it. Initially, though, it started with people literally reading the credits and taking the name off the screen. Oh. And so a lot of times, like on a TV show, I might not even get a screen credit, or if I do, the production takes it off of my payroll stub or something. Or they might take it off the call sheet on the day. Now, a lot of times when I'm signing paperwork starting a job and it's a movie, a lot of times they'll have a separate page where they say, if you're granted a screen credit, what would you like your name to appear as? And then I can write down how I want it to appear. And then that may or may not be the case. When you see the final product, maybe they went by that, or maybe they, who knows? Maybe they lost the sheet of paper by then and they just put up whatever. So in answer to your question, I think what you see on IMDb is typically what's on the screen. But there's loads of people who either didn't get a screen credit, or they're, especially for episodic TV, they don't have time to put everybody's name on, even though there's loads of people. So a lot of times those names they'll come from call sheets, and sometimes I'm not sure how they get their information, but I think they will get a call sheet and look at the back and be like, oh, these are the names of the people who did that. That you can go in and edit that.
Oh.
Yeah, you can go back and edit.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Edit your. I don't know I guess you could edit your name, but you can edit a little bit about the production or your position.
Oh. Yeah.
And then you submit that, and then someone somehow cross-references it and decides to grant it to you or not.
So you can't just make up whatever you want.
Well, you can. I mean, you kind of can, and a lot of people put stuff down, and they might say uncredited. Ooh. And so you see someone listed on IMDb, and they'll have a bunch of movies, and then it shows like, oh, I was the sound mixer on this, and then it'll say uncredited. I mean, and you know what? Maybe they did do a day when someone was sick or something. And didn't get a screen credit, so they would put it on. Yeah. For me personally, I feel like if I didn't do the majority of a project, I don't feel like I deserve to have that credit on my IMDb.
Sure.
Although there is one movie that I worked I think it was a 9-week movie or 10-week, and I think I worked 1 week and maybe not even the entire week. So I didn't expect. I certainly didn't expect a screen credit, and then I was surprised to see that it was listed in IMDb, because I wouldn't do that, because I feel like I'm taking away from the person who did most of it,
Yeah.
I don't want to take credit from them. But the funny thing is I actually ended up with getting a screen credit also on this movie, and I'm like, I only worked like 4 days. Why did?
It's not the quantity, it's the quality, isn't it? I
think
that's what that's saying.
Perhaps.
I'm glad they don't ask the director what screen credit should we give these people, because you would just end up being boom guy on 100 out of 150 of your project.
Yes.
No name, just boom guy.
The vast majority.
Or he'd just be Mike. Or just Mike, which is perfect. Well, we know who you are. You are Michael Primmer, friend of the pod now, and a good old friend, and a man with an incredible history in the film and television industry as a sound man. We should probably let you go so that you can actually get paid to do some real work as opposed to talking to us. But
talking to us, producing audio for no money.
Exactly. Yes, yeah.
So when The Killer comes out, we might desperately try and get you back on the pod, actually, to tell us about it.
Yeah. That sounds good.
But only if you haven't had that phone call from Christopher Nolan in the meantime. We know you have favourites. We know you do.
Yes. Well, I don't expect that call coming. But
thank you for joining us, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's absolutely fascinating.
Happy to be here, and look forward to talking to you again.
Did you hear that? We've got it recorded.
Yep.
He's promised to talk to us again.
Done it on tape.
You're the first interviewee we've ever had who said that. That's amazing.
Yes. Now let me hear that great end credit music that I'm credited for.